and this session will be recorded with the consent of the presentations. So, our first presenter is Josie Defaye. Josie is a PhD student at UC Berkeley's School of Education, focusing on language, literacy, and culture, with research interests in transgender studies and speculative fiction. Josie's presentation is titled Trans Epistemology and Octavia Butler's Wild Seed, Contrasting Approaches to Gender Fluidity and Embodied Knowledge. Let's welcome Josie.
Thank you. This is an excerpt from a larger paper, so I'm going to try to speak fast and hit the 18 minutes. So as this is developed, I'm titling it Transexuality and Trans Epistemology in Wild Seed and Experiment. So, Western epistemological traditions have long positioned knowledge as something produced through detachment, the knower observing the known from a critical distance. Separating knower from known creates what Haraway calls the God trick of seeing everything from nowhere, a disembodied vision claiming objectivity while obscuring its own partial perspective. Against this tradition, marginalized communities have developed alternative epistemologies, grounding knowledge in embodied experience, communal relations, and resistance to dominant categorization systems. These competing approaches to knowledge production find vivid dramatization in Octavia Butler's Wild Seed, where the shape-shifting Anyanwu and body-swapping Doro enact fundamentally different relationships to embodiment, knowledge, and power. In Wild Seed, Butler explores how alternative forms of embodiment generate distinctive ways of knowing that challenge colonial power structures. Anyanwu, an Igbo shapeshifter capable of transforming between genders, races, and even species, develops knowledge through bodily transformation rather than detached observation. As she explains, I was not a true leopard, though, until I killed one and ate a little of it. At first, I was a woman pretending to be a leopard, clay molded into leopard shape. Now, when I change, I am a leopard. Positioning knowledge as something developed through experience and becoming rather than observation, through literal incorporation rather than abstract categorization. In contrast, Doro exists as disembodied consciousness inhabiting stolen, murdered bodies, enacting an extractive relationship to embodiment, paralleling colonial approaches to knowledge. His declaration that this body needs rest if it is to continue to serve me demonstrates a fundamental alienation from embodiment, facilitating his domination of others. Current scholarship on Butler analyzes Wild Seed primarily through racial or gender frameworks without fully exploring how these dimensions intersect in Butler's epistemological vision. These readings focus primarily on identity rather than epistemology, obscuring how Butler's characters develop distinctive ways of knowing through their embodied experiences. Trans epistemological frameworks understand knowledge as emerging from bodily experiences challenging dominant categories, particularly those surrounding gender, race, and embodiment. As Nicolazzo argues, we trans people have our own epistemology, an epistemology from which we come to know ourselves, each other, and as a result can transform the narratives that have been written about us by cisgender others. Foucault reminds us that power and knowledge directly imply one another, a dynamic manifesting through Anyanwu and Doro's conflict. Rather than treating knowledge as abstract or universal, these frameworks complement work in the learning sciences, positioning knowledge as inherent in the growth and transformation of identities, located in relations among practitioners. I argue that Butler develops alternative epistemologies through gender transformation that challenge colonial power structures while imagining possibilities for transsexual resistance and community building. Reading Wild Seed through trans epistemological frameworks demonstrates Butler's challenge to Western knowledge systems separating knower from known. Through Anyanwu's transformations, Butler explores four key dimensions of trans epistemology: embodied knowing, movement across categories, communal approaches to knowledge development, and liberatory knowledge practices enabling resistance to domination. This paper is an experiment. My approach requires navigating potential anachronism in applying contemporary terminology to a text first published in 1980 before much trans theoretical work existed. Rather than claiming Butler intentionally created trans characters, I examine how her explorations of embodiment and transformation resonate with trans epistemological frameworks developed decades later. I approached this analysis as a white, queer, trans education researcher whose embodied experiences necessarily shape my interpretive lens. The significance of this reading extends beyond Butler scholarship to broader conversations about embodiment, knowledge production, and resistance to dominant frameworks. By examining how Butler develops epistemological alternatives through narrative, we gain resources for challenging contemporary systems separating knower from known, mind from body, individual from community. This approach brings together conversations often remaining separate in academic discourse, suggesting a new way Butler's speculative fiction offers theoretical insights which continue to resonate with contemporary struggles for more liberatory approaches to knowledge. Conceptual framework. Trans scholars conceptualize trans as a concept for understanding gender, embodiment, and movement. The term serves multiple functions, designating specific populations, describing embodied experiences, and offering conceptual tools for analyzing systems structuring gender difference. In casual discourse, at its most straightforward, trans functions as an umbrella term for gender-diverse people. Snorton conceives of trans as movement with no clear origin and no point of arrival, rejecting teleological understandings of gender transition as a journey from one fixed point to another, instead emphasizing perpetual becoming, transitioning as a nonlinear, undirected, dislocated, and localized movement, wherein new gender norms are being established and worked with. Snorton connects transness to blackness, arguing that trans in each of its permutations finds expression and continuous circulation within blackness, and blackness is transected by embodied procedures that fall under the sign of gender, demanding we understand transness through racial frameworks, recognizing the mutual constitution of racial and gender systems. The term transsexual comes from medical discourse, carrying historical associations associated with both pathologization and liberation. Unlike the broader transsexual specifically implicates medical systems, medical transition. Stryker locates the term's popularization in the 1950s, noting transsexual was initially introduced to draw a distinction between those transvestites who sought medical interventions to change their physical bodies, that is, their sex, and those who merely wanted to change their gendered clothing. While some scholars use transsexual descriptively to denote a historical approach to transgender experience, others critique the term as fundamentally pathologizing. I recognize this tension in using transsexuality in analyzing Butler's work. The term transsexual is complex, but functionally useful. Wildsea's primary characters, Anyanwu and Doro, can be productively understood as transsexual subjects whose experience demonstrate the constructed nature of sex itself. Neither character feels allegiance to their assigned sex at birth, nor do they demonstrate care for what Serrano would call their subconscious sex. While acknowledging the potential anachronism in applying contemporary terminology to a 1980 text, I argue that Butler's characters engage with what Halberstam identifies as transsexuality's core function, serving as a productive site for understanding how sex is made. Anyanwu's cellular self-modification exemplifies transsexuality's embodied dimension. She literally transforms her biological sex as well, at will, while Doro's consciousness, permanently separated from his original male body, manifests transsexuality's premise of identity persisting across transition. Epistemology addresses how humans develop knowledge and determine truth. Transepistemology begins with Haraway's critique that Western knowledge systems perpetuate the God trick of seeing from nowhere. This mythical objectivity, claiming universal knowledge while concealing its specific positionality, forms precisely what transepistemologies reject. Trans scholars have developed distinctive epistemological frameworks grounded in gender-variant experience. A transepistemological approach challenges Western epistemologies by centering embodied knowledge, questioning binary categorization, and valuing marginalized perspectives. Haraway's insistence that positioning is, therefore, the key practice in grounding knowledge provides the foundation that trans scholars develop into specific epistemic practices. Nicolazzo's transepistemology principles include trans people may be from oppression, but we are ourselves not of oppression, and in and through community with each other, we have the power to heal and remake ourselves as trans people, emphasizing collective knowledge building while positioning community as central to transepistemological practices. Rather than viewing knowledge as individually produced, Nicolazzo frames knowledge as communally developed through shared experiences and mutual support. Keene elaborates that transepistemologies utilize trans-experiential knowledge to advance ways of knowing gender that are less damaging, more transformative, more liberatory, and/or more representative than other forms of knowing gender, centering the explicitly political nature of transepistemologies, positioning them as tools for liberation rather than neutral approaches to knowledge. Transepistemologies challenge assumptions about objectivity, embodiment, and categorization that underlie Western knowledge systems. Through centering marginalized experiences, transepistemologies develop new approaches to knowing that benefit not only trans communities, but anyone seeking a more complete understanding of gender, bodies, and knowledge. In applying these concepts to Wild Seed, I navigate several methodological challenges. I avoid anachronistic application of contemporary terminology to a text published in 1980. Rather than claiming Butler intentionally created trans characters, I examine how her explorations of embodiment and transformation resonate with trans-epistemological frameworks developed decades later. My personal and professional positions influence this analysis, from my interest in fictional representations of embodiment to my focus on bodily transition as knowledge production. Rather than presenting this interpretation as discovering objectively existing themes, trans themes in Butler's work, I offer it as one possible reading emerging from specific theoretical commitments and lived experiences. Reading Anyanwu. At the center of Butler's Wild Seeds stands Anyanwu, a shape-shifting Igbo woman with extraordinary healing abilities who functions as a theoretical framework and narrative engine for Butler's exploration of embodied knowledge. Readers first encounter Anyanwu as a small, wizened, withered woman, but this external appearance masks her true nature as an immortal being who has lived 3 centuries, borne 47 children to 10 husbands, and developed control over her cellular structure, allowing Anyanwu to transform between genders, races, and species. Bodily fluidity, identity stability, the tension challenges frameworks positioning gender as either constructed and performative, or as essentially biological. Anyanwu's relationship to embodiment represents a self that is not primarily concerned with a sovereignty that separates, but one that enables community through her gifts of healing and protection, demonstrating an epistemology centered on bodily knowledge in service to community. Anyanwu develops medicinal knowledge by examining her own internal biology, constructing a makeshift laboratory within her body to test plants for toxicity and develop healing substances. Her shape-shifting abilities require consumption, for example, the benefits of digesting the meat of a leopard or fish in order to emulate its body. For Anyanwu, true knowledge requires physiological incorporation. It isn't enough to see and imitate, one must consume to become. Within her body, Anyanwu constructs an internal laboratory where she tests, analyzes, and synthesizes substances, functioning as both scientist and subject. Unlike Western medical traditions positioning the licensed physician as detached observer and the patient as passive object of intervention, Anyanwu materializes situated knowledge by developing medicine through her own embodied experience. Her self-directed cellular modifications exemplify what Nicolazzo identifies as trans people having the power to heal and remake ourselves, a form of knowledge production inaccessible through observation alone. When explaining that becoming a leopard requires not merely observing one, but consuming its flesh, Anyanwu articulates an epistemological principle. Authentic transformation demands material incorporation. A consumption-based epistemology directly challenges the medicalized transsexual framework, serving as a colonial form of knowledge with racializing and disenfranchising effects. Where doctor-endorsed medical transition relies on external intervention by authorities claiming objectivity, Anyanwu's self-directed transformations emerge through direct material engagement with what Anyanwu seeks to become. Anyanwu's body itself contains knowledge inaccessible through visual observation. Aligned with trans-epistemology, Butler thus positions Anyanwu's knowledge production as related to direct material engagement with the world, a practice of becoming with rather than being done to. Anyanwu as dolphin. The erotic dimension of Anyanwu's dolphin transformation disrupts hierarchical categorization. As a dolphin, Anyanwu performed a kind of dance with the male, moving and touching, certain that no human ceremony had ever drawn her in so quickly. She felt both eager and restrained, both willing and hesitant. This erotic boundary crossing creates tension between liberation and alienation, as Anyanwu acknowledges that her dolphin mate would not leave the group as she would, deserting everyone. Through this experience, Anyanwu gains knowledge inaccessible through human frameworks, knowledge existing beyond categorical boundaries of species, gender, and sexuality. Anyanwu's dolphin transformation extends her transsexual epistemology beyond human gender systems, achieving a trans-species embodiment functioning as strategic resistance to surveillance and source of knowledge otherwise inaccessible. The erotic dimension of this boundary crossing materializes trans onto epistemology, positioning the transformed body as both site and source of knowledge production. Butler's portrayal of Anyanwu's dolphin almost mating sequence disrupts the anthropocentric hierarchies structuring both human sexual relations and colonial knowledge systems. Through dolphin embodiment, Anyanwu discovers respiratory capabilities vastly exceeding human potential. Whereas humans utilize merely one or two functions of breathing, dolphins access exponentially more possibilities. The social dimension of this transformation, Anyanwu's recognition that her dolphin mate remains embedded in community, challenges the Western individualism underlying both colonial knowledge systems and traditional medical frameworks. These same European frameworks, with the persecution of the folk healer, would discredit Anyanwu's knowledge, where medicalized transsexuality positions transformation as an individual journey toward authenticity. Anyanwu's dolphin experience situates transition within webs of relation, materializing Nicolanzo's sixth tenet of trans epistemology. Invisibility and its varied meanings are central to our senses of self, community, and kinship. Through trans-species embodiment, Anyanwu demonstrates how transition generates not only personal knowledge, but alternative forms of sociality outside human frameworks of gender, sexuality, and kinship. Trans epistemology exists beyond the human. Butler anticipates contemporary post-human and transgender theoretical developments, challenging the anthropocentrism and the Anthropocene as fundamental to both colonial knowledge systems and gender normativity. Throughout Wild Seed, Anyanwu strategically employs her transformative abilities for both survival and resistance, be it becoming male while traveling for protection, adopting the warrior shape of a white plantation owner in antebellum Louisiana, or transforming into a dolphin to escape her lover/abuser Doro's surveillance, playing with and against Doro's scientistic, authoritarian, and colonial gaze, establishing her as the heroic, resisting woman whose opposition to Doro involves not simply a contest of wills or a battle of wits and philosophies, but a careful, learned consideration of the strengths and weaknesses of her opponent. Is that for time?
Okay, 30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds, okay. Jumping ahead. I have a whole section on Doro.
We have Q&A too.
Okay, great. Butler's exploration of embodied transformation in Wild Seed offers resources for imagining more ethical approaches to knowledge production, transsexual and otherwise. By portraying Anyanwu's transformative practices as sources of knowledge challenging colonial power structures, Butler demonstrates how marginalized subjects can construct alternative epistemologies to resist domination. Butler's narrative creates theoretical possibilities, demonstrating, as Butler does across her work, how speculative fiction can function as theory building. Through the shape-shifting Anyanwu, through the body-swapping Doro, Butler develops a theory of knowledge's emergence through embodied practice, challenging Western epistemological traditions while imagining alternatives, continuing to resonate with contemporary struggles for more liberatory approaches to knowledge.